This one's tough. Nick Chubb is our first running back who we're going to talk about here today. You mentioned it. I mean, grisly, like unsettling injury to see live happen, you know, to the point that I think that was one of the first ones last year that it was Joe Buck and Troy Aikman on the call. They were like, yeah, we're not showing you that replay, basically.
Right call. That was the right call.
Right call. I actually was charting. I think it must have been either Pickens or Deontay Johnson or something recently. And I was like, oh man, this is about to be the Nick Chubb play. Like, just like fast forwarding through like, you know, the Brown side of the ball or whatever. And it's like, oh God, there it is. It was tough to even just see it back on film again because we all love Nick Chubb. But you just mentioned it. We saw him out there squatting, what was it, 600 pounds? The bar.
So many pounds.
Many pounds. The bar is bent in the video, the whole thing. You know, the fantasy aggregators, the aggregator bros in general are freaking out about the bent bar and the many pounds that Nick Chubb is squatting. But, Edwin, where do we stand on Nick Chubb coming off of a grisly injury, a complicated injury, and not the first time he's had a complicated, big time. You can tell me what it really is. I'll just say big, scary, bad knee injury in his career.
Yeah. I think it's good to clarify what happened to him before. In college, when he was at Georgia, he tore his PCL, his hamstring. It was basically everything except the ACL. So that's important to sort of recognize. He dislocated the knee at that point too. That did happen. Fast forward, he's one of the most efficient running backs literally in the modern era. His yards per carry is out of this world, and he's generally one of the most likable guys, I think, in the NFL. So that's where we're at with Nick Chubb. When he had this injury in 2023, so he actually ended up having, and this is important because I think a lot of people calculate return dates from the day of the injury. It's actually the day of the surgery. So Nick Chubb actually had 2 surgical dates. His first surgical date was to fix the meniscus, right? That was on, I had it here in front of me. It was on September 29th of 23.
Okay.
Then they went back in, they repaired the ACL on November 14th of 23. So that's when the clock starts.
Okay.
Generally speaking, with ACLs, most surgeons and PTs will not release athletes until at least that 9-month mark, because we know that it's an astronomical amount of athletes re-tear if they come back before 9 months. I don't know if there's something magical about it. The data and the science still, we don't really truly know why. We just know that it happens if you come back before 9 months. So 9 months from November 14th, whatever that is like August something, right? The middle of August.
Yep.
So you also have to take into consideration he had the meniscus, and he has the history of this in general. Could you call it a revision, which means you go back in and do the same surgery again? Not technically, but to a certain degree, it's another major surgery to the same joint. So if you add another month to that, that's also typically you get a revision. PTs and surgeons, they say, hey, this time we're gonna tack on another month, right? So you're, even from an availability perspective, you're looking at potentially end of September to really see Nick Chubb back, seeing his full workload volume. You're probably looking at another month before you're seeing him actually bounce back and look like Nick Chubb, if that happens again. So, okay, I've already rambled a lot. I don't know if that's a lot. I don't know if you have anything to add from there, Matt.
No, listen, I think that all makes a lot of sense to me. So, there's something about, like, I don't know anything about anything when it comes to this, to knee injuries, anything like that. But just when you see something like that happen on live TV, you're like, this is going to be complicated, like this return process here. And I think that's basically what you are saying as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're really looking at, like I said, some sort of, end of September, middle of October, like Halloween is probably like a time where we may look up and like, oh, look, it's Nick Chubb. He's taking the carries, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing about returning after an ACL. And so these are basically all the boxes that Breece Hall did check last year. I'm going to compare it to how many Nick Chubb. These are basically criteria of what we see in successful returns in the first year after an ACL among running backs. But the number one thing I want to get across is most people think like, oh yeah, the ACL, it doesn't matter anymore. It's a thing in the past. It's not true. 30% of running backs in the NFL don't ever come back. This is since 2011. Don't come back at all in year 2, right? Some of them don't come back at all in the first year. It happens, right? We saw that with Jerick McKinnon. You see that with Lamar Miller. He sort of fell off the face of the earth. So I wanted to make that point first. But here are the criteria, and I'll say I'll say the ones that he does meet, right? So a minimum of 9 months to rehab. He got that. But really, should it be 10 months? Okay, I still gave it to him. I'm trying to be generous. High NFL draft capital, obviously. Okay, so that's where it ends. So the next criteria, 26 years or younger. Nick Chubb doesn't meet that. Minimal complexity of injury. You just mentioned it. He doesn't meet that. Nick Chubb is a freak athlete, right? But when we're talking like SPARQ score, whatever, we're talking top 5 percentile of an athleticism score. He's close, doesn't quite meet that, right? So the other thing is projected pass catching work and a high touch volume count. How much are they going to give him when he comes back, even if he does come back and look like Nick Chubb, right? So he doesn't meet that either. So he meets basically 2 of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 criteria. Generally speaking, I would just write most guys off. Again, I said, and I wrote in the profile before we saw him squat 600 pounds. I basically said, I give Nick Chubb a 5 to 10, this is arbitrary, a 5 to 10% chance to come back and actually just be Nick Chubb because he is a freak, right? Sometimes you have outliers. You have to sort of give benefit of the doubt where they've earned it, and Nick Chubb has definitely earned that. But, you know, on one side, I'll say, yeah, there's a 5 to 10% chance he comes back and it's like, oh, he smashes. There's what is that, 90, 95% chance that he has like a Javonte Williams type season, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of like 11 fantasy points per game. But I would, I know there's a lot there, but I definitely want to get your take on like, what is that backfield going to look like in your opinion? How does it project out? I know that they're sort of leaning more pass heavy. Does that involve Nick Chubb, even if he does come back? There's a lot that I still would like to suss out too.
Yeah, the pass catching part of this is pretty key because when we're talking about Breece Hall last year, week 12 on, these were his target totals: 9, 8, 9, 2, weird, 16, 9, 2. Like that's a lot of pass catching work that even when he wasn't having these monster games towards the end of the season, he was still being boosted up. The floor was boosted up because of that pass catching work. That's not going to be the case with Nick Chubb. It's never been the type of player he was anyways, but it's certainly not going to be this year because, as you mentioned, you bring in Jerry Jeudy, like they've just clearly committed to being more of a Deshaun Watson centric team. And we didn't talk Watson in this episode, even though he's coming off of a shoulder situation. I'm glad you tacitly mentioned that thing about Watson because I didn't want to talk about Watson just because like the crux with him is just, is he going to be a good quarterback or not? And like whether he's healthy or not is then like a whole separate question. So that would be like a 40-minute podcast all on its own. But he's at least a part of this discussion here with the Nick Chubb thing because it's what they want to be. Like their actions are speaking as loud as their words here that they want to transition this team kind of away from Nick Chubb as a central gravitational point to Deshaun Watson. Whether that's going to be successful or not, again, is almost a separate conversation. So I guess bottom line here, Edwin, because like they have other guys there. They have Jerome Ford, who's had some moments. I think Donta Foreman's had some really quality moments here the last couple of years as a fill-in back for the Bears and the Panthers. I think those guys can capably hold down the fort for the first part of the season. But do you want to make Nick Chubb a finalist here, even though, like you said, it's a pretty low likelihood he's ever the superstar that he is again. But still, he is coming off the board as running back 41. And if he can finish the season strong, there could be a chance that is a value. Or are you just kind of like, this situation is a little too dicey even for your no risk it, no biscuit blood?
Yeah, but I think it might be sort of I would modify what you said there at the end. I would say it's not so much that I think it's risky to draft Nick Chubb. I would just say that I don't think that it's going to end up paying off from an upside perspective. So I would not wave him in.
All right, cool. Then we will not. But I'm glad that you've got at least the candle lit for Nick Chubb because I want to keep the candle lit for Nick Chubb. Whether it ends up being a great pick or not, I think is a whole separate conversation.